In a world where an AI becomes conscious and essentially takes on the idea of what it means to be an individual, do you think, and we are probably
where you get robot grandchildren.
this is an important ongoing thing for us because I've made a joke with my kids forever that their kids or their grandkids are going to marry a robot, which I think is still probably unlikely. Welcome everybody to AI for Humans. We are a podcast about AI, featuring AI tools, AI news, and all sorts of other stuff that you might normally see. This is an unusual episode of AI for Humans because my co-founder slash partner slash longtime friend Kevin Pereira is actually under the weather. So we are going to be doing a very truncated version of this show this week. We want to make sure we get something in your ears and talk a little bit about what's going on with AI. But more excitingly, and maybe excitingly, I don't know, I'm going to interview my wife, Kim Purcell, who is a novelist and a teacher, about AI. And she has some very different opinions than I do. But also, like, we get into a little conversation. It'll be weird. It's fun. We're going to talk a little bit about generative AI and creativity. We're going to talk a little bit about the tools. It's going to be a strange one. The whole episode is going to be pretty short. I will tell you that right now. So if this is your normal show you come to, please know this is a different episode. If it's not your normal show you come to, welcome. First of all, thank you for coming to this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe. If you are on a podcast app, please leave us a 5-star review. And thank you so much for doing it. The funny thing is, I don't even know how to get into this show this week. I will talk about the dumb thing that I did with AI. Every week, Kevin, who's not here, as I mentioned, and I talk about the dumb things we do with AI. This is where we spend time playing with all sorts of different AI tools and trying different things around artificial intelligence. This week, I played around with Canva. Canva launched as a ChatGPT plugin. I have to say it's disappointing. In general, if you're not familiar with Canva, Canva is a remarkable tool that allows people to make things like pitch decks or Instagram posts or YouTube thumbnails on their own, kind of being able to help people be better designers. There's a ton of different templates that you can use within Canva. It's super worthwhile. We use it to design a bunch of things we do for the show, whether they're professional looking or not. And this week, Canva announced a ChatGPT plugin. So on ChatGPT Plus, and you have to have Plus, which is the $20 version, and the plugins are special programs that are built into ChatGPT. There's a drop-down menu, you choose it, and within the plugins now is a Canva plugin. Ostensibly, this is really cool because it means that you can easily just say, go make me this thing, and it comes back. In practice, though, this is a little bit funky. What it basically does is you can say, make me an Instagram post for AI for Humans, and you go in and you play with it and you say, do this thing. It'll take the thing and it will make a series of suggestions. It's not actually making the thing, which is, I guess, not surprising considering it makes a suggestion of templates, which then you have to go through to Canva for actually executing on. The good news is it cuts one step out. It's kind of like a Canva search product. It's fine. It's fine. The other really cool thing is there's a really interesting new AI imaging software out called Ideogram, Ideogram.ai. Imagine Midjourney and Instagram had a baby. That's what Ideogram is. So you go to Ideogram, you type in whatever you want. The big difference between this and, say, Midjourney or something like Stable Diffusion is that Ideogram is really good at making text. So you can use it to make posters. You can use it to make iconic graphics, or like you can do, I use it to make t-shirts. So you can make AI for Humans t-shirts and see what they might look on all sorts of different people. So Ideogram was actually created by a couple ex-Google engineers. And one of the things that's very cool about this, even better than Midjourney, it's very easy to use. You just type in your description. It's a single box. It says generate. It's open to everybody right now. Unlike Midjourney, which has the problem with having to know how to use Discord, unlike Stable Diffusion, which is a lot of back-end issues, trying to load it onto a computer, doing all sorts of other stuff, Ideogram is the most dead simple way I've seen generative AI work. So if you go there, try it out. The other thing it's really good at is making logos. I used it to make a few AI for Humans logos. There's a couple weird ones. I'm not sure what's going on with these robots. They look like they've got like a weird arm coming out of their bodies, which you'll take for that for what it will. But it's a very cool way to kind of explore generative AI and try something different. especially when you have the ability to really have anybody do this. Anyway, it's called Ideogram. That is something that's very cool to do stuff with. And of course, every week we love to shout out how other people are doing cool stuff with AI as well. There's a guy on TikTok named Uncle Jesse for real. So Uncle Jesse for real, not Connor for real, not Uncle Jesse, but Uncle Jesse for real, who took a Midjourney image and turned it into a 3D printed model of a little a Cthulhu skull. It was just really cool to see somebody take an AI generated image and bring it into the real world. So I think that's super fascinating. There's a really interesting movement of people who are diving deeper down with what these tools can do and what Midjourney can do. There hasn't been like, say, leaps of generations, but we have seen a lot of people kind of get closer and closer to like more specialized use cases around Midjourney. And I think this is a really good example of that. And now it's time for the news.
Gotta get them clicks. Clicks! Gotta get those views. Views! Oh yeah! Here comes the news. It's time for the news. News! AI for humans with news.
I still don't know entirely how to do this by myself, so Kevin, I miss you. But there's a couple big news stories this week. The Verge had a story which basically says that Apple is reportedly spending millions of dollars a day training an AI. So people have been wondering for a long time, what is Apple going to do with AI and generative AI? And they seem like they were behind the game. But Apple, as we know, when you look at the Vision Pro or really any Apple product they've released, they have a tendency to do things behind the scenes and then release it at once when it's ready. Generally, Apple has been pretty good about letting other people test the waters and then come out with something. So according to the information, this is a big story that they basically have been working on foundational models, which probably means the beginning stages. And it sounds like there's only about 16 people that are members of this team, which does sound pretty small right now. But when you think about what OpenAI was, it wasn't very big either at the beginning. So this could be like Apple's kind of like stepping stone into the space. I have to think, though, that they've seen what Google's doing, what Microsoft is doing, and they know they have to be a part of this. I also think that Apple can't be underestimated, period, now. Like, they've clearly had a lot of history coming into products and then like taking them over in some ways. There's a lot of people out there who would argue that the best days of Apple are behind it when Steve Jobs passed away, but Tim Cook has made his name taking products and making them bigger than ever before. Vision Pro is going to be interesting to watch, but it will be really interesting to see what their entry point into generative AI looks like. Oh, I should mention, we don't have an AI co-host this week, mostly because the amount of work for me to put this together on my own is enough on its side, but we will return with an AI co-host next week, so don't worry. Okay, another big story that broke this week was that Tim Sweeney, who's the head of Epic, said on Twitter that generative AI games are going to be allowed on the Epic Store. This is a pretty big deal in that if you're not familiar with the game space, Steam, which is Valve's company and distribution, a huge distribution product for PC gaming, has said that they are not going to allow games that have generative AI in the Steam store. And obviously there's a lot of conversations about copyright, about who owns what in that space. Epic has always been a little bit of a company that likes to push back against the mainstream. They famously had a fight against Apple and then lost around the App Store. So they definitely have a history of kind of going against the grain on some of this stuff. When it comes to generative AI art assets, I think we're all in a weird space right now because no one really knows what the legality of all this is. We can dive into this, and we do dive into this on the show every week, talking about the idea of exactly what these models, how they use art, how they get the rights to art, who owns the right to these things. How do you pay out to the tens of thousands of creators whose works were scraped to kind of provide these models? Are they part of these models? So I think that all of this is going to be a bigger conversation, but I will shout out the fact that I think that Tim at least is in the place where he is trying to keep the conversation open, whereas it feels like on the Valve side, shutting it down now feels like a legal move, but maybe they're putting a foot in the sand. There's a real divide, obviously, in the gamer side, and you see this in a lot of different places, both on the Hollywood side, on games, and every kind of creative entity. And we'll get into this when I talk to my wife later, who is a novelist and has very strong thoughts about AI and generative AI, and mostly more on a creative side. I think right now we're in such kind of a Wild West sort of scenario. And the important thing to remember about the Wild West, which is I think often forgotten about, is that in general, it's not a great place to live. And I think we have to figure out a rule of law at some point sooner rather than later, because if we don't, we're going to be stuck in this world where no one really knows what's okay. No one really knows what's allowed. It's all out of the box now. When it's out of the box, how do you move forward? And finally, before we go, the last news story, this is a weird one. Google has introduced Google Meet AI. And Google Meet AI is part of their new Duet suite, which I think is basically an AI program suite that's designed to bring generative AI to the office in some form or another. But Google Meet AI, this is the best thing. It will allow you to attend meetings with your own personal AI. So essentially, if you can't make a meeting, it pops up a little image of somebody, looks like you, but it says like this meeting's attended by AI. It'll take notes for you, will do all this stuff. And supposedly, if nobody shows up for the meeting, which, you know, could happen very easily, the meeting gets canceled. So there's a world where if you have a meeting of, say, 10 people and you can't make it, this could be super useful because then you get a real sense of what was said in the meeting. So basically, it's going to allow you to attend the meeting and then take notes. The funniest thing I think about with this is enough people already don't like meetings. We're in a world where meetings, if you work in a company, you know that meetings, like let's say 50% of the meetings or more are probably not needed. You oftentimes get a sense of just people talking to hear themselves talk. What if you attend one of these meetings and you're the only person in the meeting and everybody else is an AI? The meeting hasn't been canceled, and yet you're there having to give your information out to just a bunch of AIs. I just am not entirely sure how this is going to play out. I think it could be a really interesting way of opening the door to bringing AI tools into the workforce in an interesting way. Okay, so this week, again, as I've said, a very weird, unusual show, no demo of the day, weird news as we just got through it. And now, even stranger, it's an interview, but this is an interview between me and my wife. You're going to see the two of us. If you're watching on video, we're going to be on the same camera because in our house, we don't have a second microphone set up. So we're on the same camera. There will be coverage of it on the YouTube channel, but in general, you'll be hear us both back and forth. It's a pretty short interview. Yeah, listen to it, enjoy it, see what you think, and then I'll be back at the end of it to say goodbye. All right, we're here. We're recording because, as we mentioned at the top of the show, Kevin is sick. Get better, Kevin. But I'm here with my wife, Kim Purcell.
Hello.
Who is a novelist, a creative writing teacher. She's written a couple books. And we are here to talk about artificial intelligence because we have a lot of conversations in our family about
AI? Oh my
AI?
God, too many.
We had a big conversation. Remember Pi?
You're asking me to be constructively critical.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Pi. Actually, I understand Pi. I wish I had that voice. You know?
Well, that's the fancy Australian woman's voice. Yeah, exactly.
It's the perfect accent.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about AI for you coming from your place, which is you are a novelist. You've spent a lot of time thinking about how narratives are crafted. You've thought a lot about what AI can and can't do. You've also spent some time playing around with AI tools. What is your take right now on AI and the AI landscape when it comes to creativity?
Well, I think that it can be very anti-creativity. And I know we've had a lot of talks about this, but I just feel like I feel sad for so many kids and teens who are really drawn to it because just a natural instinct is to be like, my writing's not good enough. And, oh, look, I could do this and it can be way better and I can impress people. But what it ends up doing is hurting that creative fire, hurting that creative, confidence, really.
We think a lot about this too, and we talked about what it means to use these as tools rather than consider them as narrative devices that are going to write on their own. Mm-hmm. It really feels like to me when I spend time with these things now, they're not very good at coming up with ideas, original thought, or anything. Do you see any use cases for, let's talk about as a writer first, like what use cases would you see as a writer for this sort of stuff, if any?
Well, I kind of feel like you're robbing yourself of the joy of writing if you use AI at all. If you're trying to make money, come on. Most writers don't make much money, so it has
we have to be clear about that. Writing is not the best job if you want to make money. It's an important thing to be aware of.
So it has to be for the joy of it. So then you've gone into, you've used AI for your writing, and you've robbed yourself of the joy, and it's not going to be good. I mean, honestly, if your writing is not good enough, and to the point that AI is better, then, well, you got to work on your skills. But honestly, there's nothing I've ever seen AI write that isn't laughably goofy and ridiculous. It's just taking this amalgamation of all the bad writing that exists and putting it together. So now if you give it a really good prompt, sometimes it can come up with a kind of interesting story idea, but it won't have that heart. It won't have that voice. It won't have that originality. It won't have that weirdness, because that's not something AI does well. But yet great writing does weirdness well.
Okay, I get that. I've said that on the show too, which I believe that like original voices especially will not be taken away really maybe ever by AI. Okay, let's project out a little bit. Let's project out, say, 2 to 5 years in the future. Let's imagine a world where an AI novel gets published. And a big part of this is like nobody knows it's AI, but then somebody comes out and 6 months later says it's AI, and it's a piece of genre fiction. There are people who have written books. 50 Shades is a good example, which was Twilight fan fiction originally. Do you think when that happens, because I think it probably will happen at some point, and again, I'm not saying that I believe this is going to overtake writing. I think, as we just mentioned, original voices are really important, and they always will be. Do you think when that happens, people will see that writing differently than they would see writing from a person?
Yeah, I think they'll always see it as a cheat.
Okay, imagine a world where you felt really attached to a book, and then you found out that it was written by AI. How would that feel to you?
Well, it would feel the same as if anybody copied anything. So you've read an amazing book, and then you learned they copied it from someone. You would feel cheated. You'd be like, ugh.
So my question to you is, there's a very famous quote, good artists borrow, great artists steal, right? And this is a thing where everybody's creative activity is an amalgamation of things that have come before. And that we have these stories as humanity that are kind of built in, the archetypes, which you know really well, you've studied all these things. How much of that is writing versus how much of the person's experience is writing? So I think this is something that's really important to get at is, what does a person's experience add to a narrative versus what an AI, because it doesn't have that experience, can add to a narrative? How much of it can be faked? Do you think any of it can be faked?
I think it can be faked in a very boring way. But really, those wonderful stories, they really come from the heart. I mean, if you look at any book, a huge percentage of it is thoughts or description as told by the character through their eyes, ears, and nose. So that's all, your own personal experience as a writer that you're putting into the narrative. Genre fiction is fabulous. It uses all the wonderful tools. Now, some of it's super cheesy and not great writing, but it's fast-paced, so people read it. But the very best genre fiction is very literary. It's amazing. It's using all the literary tools that we have at our disposal, and really everything is told through the writer's lens, who is using the character's lens, and the characters they create are based on their own life experience and their own insights. The very best writing is rooted in observations about humanity, and that is really such a personal and beautiful thing when it's done right.
Actually, I think that gets to a really important point, which is the idea that creative actions often are driven by being human, right? And by our own personal experiences. There probably will be a world, now who knows, where you call it something other than AI. We've seen movies like Her, all these other movies where an AI starts to become conscious, right? And this is, who knows if this is even possible. In a world where an AI becomes conscious and essentially takes on the idea of what it means to be an individual, do you think, and we are probably...
where you get robot grandchildren.
Yeah. This is an important ongoing thing for us, because I've made a joke with my kids forever that their kids or their grandkids are going to marry a robot, which I think is still probably unlikely. But, okay, so in a world where there's a real individual non-human entity, say, maybe they're not born, but when they're born, they're come to life as like whatever, a teenager, let's say. God forbid, really, God forbid. But they
teenage robots.
Yeah, they come to fruition as a teenager. Do you think there's a world where at some point that entity or that thing could have its own personal experiences and then create an interesting narrative?
I guess. I mean, I don't really think that that's going to happen because I do believe in a soul. And we've talked about this, and you're like, well, what if robots get souls? I don't know. I just have a little bit more of a spiritual take on things. And I just don't think that's possible. So I don't see that happening. But if it did, and, robots got souls, then maybe.
Robots Got Souls is a good name for a book, by the way. We could write a book about called Robots Got Souls. Okay, last question. Obviously, you've seen enough of the stuff that we cover on the show, and you've done a fair amount of trying and playing around with stuff. Is there anything that you would say is worthwhile for writers or kind of any creatives out there to at least play with? And one of the things we say a lot is that these are tools. And I think that people who are using the narrative to say they're going to overtake creatives overall, I think is not real. But the tools are interesting, right? Like what have you played with that's kind of interesting to you, and what do you see something that's worth creatives doing?
Okay, so even as a writer, I really like the art making kind of tools because sometimes you can feed in a bunch of elements of about your characters, and then it will come up with this really cool image, and that could feed your creativity. Like one of the huge things I do with my own writing and with my students is I get them to grab a bunch of objects, weird stuff around their house, and then somehow we include them in the stories. And the way they do that, it really pops the stories. So you could really use AI for that. Hey, give me a list of 10 random weird objects. And then you have them and you'd be like, okay, that's my challenge for today. And I really think playing with your creativity is really great. So using AI to help yourself play and create a sense of fun would be huge.
That's really interesting because I think in some ways you get to the heart of using it not to do the creative work, but to help empower you to do the things that you want to do. Like, how do you make it so that, and that's not to say that writing isn't a struggle, because we both know it is. You've written 2 books. I've attempted to write a couple books, and it is hard. It is hard.
I've written many books.
That's true. You've published 2 books. You've written 10 books, I think. Yeah.
So many books.
Yeah, but
I mean, the it's like an iceberg, in terms of most writers. What you see is almost nothing of what they've done. And I think that's the thing about taking shortcuts like AI. Yeah. You're not developing and growing and learning. And every book I write, I learn something, I grow, I expand, and whether or not it gets published. There is a great benefit in creativity, in drawing, in writing, in any kind of form of creativity, regardless of the future result of that item.
I think that's an interesting thing is
the
journey versus the result too, right? Like in the journey, when you're using these tools, if you're trying to skip the journey in part, you're going to end up with a much less interesting final product, right?
It's like meditating, but I'm going to get AI to meditate for me.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea, right? Okay, finally, before we go, you're also a teacher. You teach creative writing. How do you speak to people out there who may have kids that are dealing with seeing this stuff, other teachers? Like, what are the things that you want to tell people out there about these tools that exist and how people are using them?
Well, I think the big problem is this pressure on kids and teens to create this perfect piece of writing in their first draft. And instead, I think teachers need to teach students how to speed write, to let go of worries about spelling and grammar. That's for later drafts. And also to add joy. Like, so many kids are stripped of joy when it comes to the writing process. So of course they're going to AI because they hate it. And one of the things that I do is I pull them back toward a feeling of loving writing and to find that joy within them so that they just kind of sparkle. And that's what I'm aiming for, that joy moment. And so if you're using AI, you lose that. There's no joy. But also the tearing apart of students' work, the negative nature of a lot of feedback, which kills the kids' creativity, kills their joy. That act is what is turning so many kids toward AI, feeling like, well, I don't want to be destroyed. I don't want to get my heart ripped out. I'm going to get this computer to do it, and then
that's interesting. So basically, in part, it may be a changing of how we're teaching creativity to make it people. Okay.
Totally. And no more peer editing. Nothing that will hurt teen. I mean, in terms of editing, we already use grammar, spell check, Grammarly. That's an AI.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't mind editing work using AI, but you still have to be careful. How much is it rewriting of your voice? You know, even if you use Grammarly, it'll be like, do this correctly. And you're like, yeah, but that ruins
Doesn't
my
sound right.
voice. It ruins my sarcasm or whatever was in that piece that made it come alive.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this very weird experience of two people on one camera and one microphone. But thanks, Kim. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. I'll see you in the kitchen.
Everybody, that's it. What a weird show. Kevin, get better soon. We need you here. I need you back here for next week. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you're not following us on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please do leave us a review on any of those platforms. Interact with us. As Kevin says, we actually over-engage with our audience. We love hearing from you. I would love to hear what you think about this show. I mean, please, it's not going to be a normal format going forward, but let us know. I'm really curious to kind of hear what you think about what we're doing here, how things are different, how we can change things up. We want to do this show for a very long time, and we're excited to do it. So again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week with the full staff back. Bye-bye.